All right, so welcome to Biography Week. Today's biography is called Abe's Honest Words: The Life of Abraham Lincoln by a woman named Doreen Rappaport. So before we read, I want to go over a couple words that we might see that might be difficult or you may be unfamiliar. So let's look over those. So the first one is haste. Haste is a noun. Well, the way it's used in this book, it's used as a noun. It means hurry or quickness in movement. So haste is something that you move with. It's a noun, right? So it's not exactly like I can't haste. It's not a verb. The next word is perpetual. This is an adjective, which means never ending or changing. I really like the word perpetual. It's kind of fun. The next one is humble. That is also an adjective. It means modest. I was just trying to think of the opposite of like, I poop, I messed that up. Um, like, what's the opposite of being humble? Um, Conceited. Someone who brags a lot is conceited, um, which is the opposite of someone who is humble. Like, okay. The next one, resolve, as a verb. When you when you resolve to do something, you decide firmly on a course of action. The next word we have is tension as a noun. Tension in this situation is going to be referring to mental or emotional strain, so difficulty. Address. So this word has multiple meanings. The way it's going to be used in this story today is the address that Abraham Lincoln gives is referring to an official speech that he gives. The next word is proclamation. A proclamation is a noun which refers to an official public announcement. And then finally, we have the word opposed, used as a verb. Opposed means to be against something. So if you oppose something, you're against it. Like you could oppose homework, right? I also want to give you a little bit of background about the time period that Abraham Lincoln was alive during. Abraham Lincoln did not know much about war when he became president of the United States in 1860, but the Civil War began a month after he took office. So he became president and then the Civil War started. Back then, slavery was allowed and African Americans could be bought and sold and had no rights. Slaves were a big part of the farming system in the South, the southern United States. Most people began to feel that slavery was wrong, especially people in the North thought that way. Lincoln, who did not want slavery and new lands being added in the West, was elected president in November 1860. So, if you recall, when we learned about California becoming a state in 1850, that was before Lincoln was president, one of the things they had to figure out is if California would be a slave state or a free state. And they people in California wanted to be a free state, but Congress, the southern states in Congress, when they were ratifying that, had a problem with that. They wanted California to be a slave state. So we kind of learned a little bit already about that disagreement going on. When Abraham Lincoln became president, he decided that, okay, from now on, it doesn't matter. Like, we're not even going to vote on this. I don't think any state should be a slave state if it's new. Between the election and when Lincoln took office in March 1861, some southern states seceded or left the United States. So when Lincoln was elected, everyone kind of knew his thoughts about slavery. And so the states in the South, they were like, okay, we're out. We are leaving the US. We're making our own country. The Civil War began in April. So, yeah, that's a tough first month for Abraham Lincoln, right? So the Civil War is a very special war, special being a kind of strange word for me to use, but it's a war where the states were fighting each other. It's the war that has caused the most death out of all the wars that America has ever fought in. It killed the most Americans. So it's remembered as a very, very bloody war. The northern states were called the Union, and the southern states were called the Confederacy. And the war lasted. It began, remember, in 1861, and it lasted until 1865. So it was 4 years. When we read about this biography, we're going to find out how President Lincoln reacted, what he did and said, and why people remember him as one of the greatest presidents our country has ever had. I'm going to show you also, while we are going through this, I'm going to show you how we're going to answer the questions this week, trying to make it, I don't know, hopefully it's easier for you than using a Google document, so because you'll be able to see the text right in front of you. So I'm going to kind of model it today. You don't have to do this today, but tomorrow when we have another biography, I want you to kind of replicate what I'm doing right now. Okay? So when I put the pages on a slide, so this is actually our reading book opened up. So you actually have 2 pages here. And so you've got the pages, and then over on the side you have questions. So usually I have 1 or 2 questions. Down here it says click to add speaker notes. I'm not in presentation view. I'm creating the slideshow right now kind of view. Down here is where I'm going to answer the questions. So it says click to add speaker notes. So I'm going to do number 1, and then I'm going to type my answer to question number 1. If there was 2 questions, then after I answer number 1, I just hit enter and then do number 2 and answer that question, right? So the question is, what part of the title gives the reader a clue that this is a biography? So I'm actually reading the question first before I read the page, notice, because I want to kind of be keeping my eyes peeled for information that'll help me answer it, right? So this question's actually about the title, and it wants to know, so Abe's Honest Words, The Life of Abraham Lincoln. So make sure when you read that title, you're reading the whole thing. So this is like the big part of the title, but this is also part of the title too, right? So when I think about clues that this is going to be a biography, the life of is a big clue. So a lot of biographies will be like the life of Gina Hanko, right? The life of Abraham Lincoln. So that's kind of our biography clue. Okay, so when I answer the question, I want to make sure I'm answering it up to level 3 standards. So I'm going to restate the question. The part of the title that gives the reader a clue that this is a biography is when, actually I'm going to change that, are the words the life of. This is a clue as biographies are texts that describes a person's life. Right? So I answered the question by restating it. I kind of explained why this is a clue. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read this page. Now I know that like looking at my screen right now, it's like I can't read these little tiny words and they're in white and it's like blue. So if you have trouble and you want to see that text also, what you can do is you can use this zoom button. When you click on that, it'll zoom in, okay? And if you want it to click back out, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go, if you just do this fit, it goes back to normal, okay? So you can always use the zoom button to help yourself out. In the slave state of Kentucky, Deep in the wilderness, young Abraham learned to hunt for nuts and currants, and fish for trout and bass, and tend to soil and seed. He learned sorrow at age 9 when his mama died, but he found great joy with a loving stepmother who encouraged him to read and learn. So the beginning of this biography, like most biographies, begins with his childhood. This is the next 2 pages. Does the writing style sound more like an expository text or a narrative? What point of view is being used? So I'm going to go ahead and read, and then I'll answer those 2. Oh my gosh, my door slammed and that scared me. Okay. Abraham Lincoln is my name, and with my pen I wrote the same. I wrote in both haste and speed, and left it here for fools to read. Whenever we get to this section with blue and it's kind of italicized, those are actually Abraham Lincoln wrote that himself. So if you notice, there's another one over here that kind of ties in cleverly with the title, Abe's Honest Words, because Abraham Lincoln's words, quotes from him, are actually kind of scattered throughout this text. I think that's kind of cool. The family moved deeper into the wilderness to the free state of Indiana. Panther screams and prowling bears filled Abraham's nights with fear. He had just a mite of schooling, yet he loved words the way his papa, a master storyteller, did. He stuffed books inside his shirt. In between splitting wood and plowing, he stood in the field and read. He read some books so many times he knew whole parts by heart. The things I want to know are in books. My best friend is the man who will give me a book I ain't read. So I'm going to go and answer these questions down here in speaker notes. So number 1, does the writing style sound more like an expository text or a narrative? So an expository text, remember, would be like our social studies book. Or does it sound more like a narrative, which we know is a story? Personally, I think this sounds like a story. It's kind of it had a beginning of when he was born. It's talking about what he's doing as a child. He's learning to read. He grew up in the wilderness, though. He didn't really have much schooling. It said he had just a mite of schooling, which means he didn't really go to school all that much. But he was an avid reader, right? So all of that sounds like storytelling, okay? So to answer that first question, the writing style sounds like a narrative. I think this because the author is describing, maybe we'll say describing the story of Abraham Lincoln's life. And I don't like that word describing. That sounds too expository, doesn't it? Maybe telling, because you tell a story, you don't describe a story, right? Yeah, I like that. Okay. Number 2, what point of view is being used? So remember we talked about point of view a while back. So there were 3 points of view we discussed. So first person is where the author is a character. Second person is when it's like a command, when we use the word you a lot, right? And third person is when the person telling the story is like an outside of the story, an outside narrator. And in this case, the only way that this could possibly be first person is if Abraham Lincoln himself were writing this book, because it's about him, right? Well, I suppose I could pretend like maybe I was Abraham Lincoln's friend and I could be describing all the stuff I see, and then, yeah, that would be in first person. So I lied. It's not the only way. But after reading these pages, I know that this is being told in third person, right? The point of view being used is the third person. Storyteller is an outside narrator, not a character. Okay, so we're going to keep going. So on this page, we're going to look for these two questions. Explain the meaning of the metaphor. He stored these different voices in his heart and wove them into his own words. So I kind of want to keep my eyes peeled for that quote. And how does the author's description of New Orleans make Lincoln's quote at the bottom of the page more powerful? So I see the quote right here in blue, but I want to look for his description of New Orleans. Okay, I will do that while I read. Another moved to New Salem, a village in Illinois. The long, lanky boy was a man now. He ferried people and goods down the Ohio and Mississippi River. So he's a man now. Time has passed, right? Okay. Oh, series. Why are you looking at Mississippi? I didn't say that. Anyways, he's a man now. Time's passed. He moved to New Salem, Illinois, and he's working as looks like he's operating a boat on the Mississippi River, transporting people. In between the pull of the pole and the splash of the water, he listened to hunters spin tall tales of a mighty marksman, half man, half alligator, and sailors describe giant mosquitoes that could kill a man. These sound like tall tales to me, don't they? Yeah. But he's transporting people across or down the river, and he's listening to them tell stories and tell tall tales, actually, right? He heard lawyers tell how they used words to gain justice for ordinary folks. He heard preachers quote from the Bible, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." So not only is he hearing these hunters spinning their tall tales, but he is also hearing lawyers talk about how they use their words to change laws and make life better for some people. He heard preachers talk about things they've read in the Bible. Different people from different walks of life, right? He stored these different voices in his heart and wove them into his own words. Oh, there is that metaphor. Okay, let's think about that. He stored these voices. Well, who is he? He is Lincoln, right? And these different voices, he's talking about the people he hears talking on the ferry. So what do you think it means to store something in the voices in your heart? Like, can you actually take someone's voice and shove it in your heart? Of course not. That's why it's a metaphor, right? But if you store them in your heart, that he listened, right? And he remembered. And then it says he wove them into his own words. Now, again, you cannot weave voices into words. That's impossible. It's a metaphor, which means listening to these people talk, it kind of taught him, how to tell a good story or how to use what you've read and communicate that to other people to help them understand, or how to use words to cure injustice, right? Like the lawyers were doing. And he kind of understand that power. Let's answer that question. Metaphor, he stored these different voices in his heart and wove them into his own words. Means that as a ferryman, Lincoln heard many stories being told by people, I'll say different kinds of people. Through their stories, he learned about the power of words and began to understand how he could also use words in a powerful and meaningful way. Enter number 2. We haven't got to New Orleans yet, right? Okay, let's keep reading. The long, muddy Mississippi River brought Lincoln south to New Orleans. He walked on cobblestone paths and along canals, past flowers spilling over lacy iron balconies. He saw men and women in fancy clothes, eating fancy food and sipping wine. French, Spanish, and English words filled his ears, but a hideous sight shattered his joy. So, that description of New Orleans, before I read the next part, the hideous sight that shattered his joy, lacy balconies, flowers, fancy clothes, fancy foods, sipping wine. Sounds pretty fantastic, right? Fancy, a lot of fancy. Um, and then here's Lincoln's words describing what he saw. 12 Negroes chained 6 and 6 together, strung together like so many fish upon a trout line, being separated forever from their childhood, their friends, their fathers and mothers, and brothers and sisters, from their wives and children into perpetual slavery. Wow, that sounds horrible. How does the description of New Orleans make Lincoln's quote more powerful? So while I guess I'm thinking like while these people are wearing their fancy clothes and eating fancy food, surrounded by flowers, at the same time you've got these other people whose lives are destroyed and have no freedom. And the contrast between those two has to be pretty staggering, right? Startling. Abraham saw that and he was able to understand that that wasn't right. Why are these people fancy and these people, well, slaves, right? So let's write about that. The author's description of New Orleans includes, let's just talk about that description. Flowers, fancy clothes, fancy food, and in there. Let's use one of those good words where we can show a contrast. In contrast, nearby, Lincoln's quote describes a nearby group of slaves. He describes how their lives are ruined. So, yeah, this beautiful life is not so beautiful after all in New Orleans, is it? Okay, the questions on the next page are: what detail from the text suggests that the author thought Lincoln was a good speaker? And then what clues on page 247 help the reader understand the meaning of the word legislature? Okay. Lincoln worked at many jobs: farmhand, store owner, postmaster, surveyor, rail splitter. Wherever, whatever, he always had a book in hand. Elocution, grammar, mathematics, biography, history, poetry, plays. Upon the subject of education, I view it as the most important subject which we as a people can be engaged in. Abraham Lincoln's words, right? Education is super important. America was growing. Farmers needed new waterways and railroads to ship their crops. Everyone needed better education. If he became a lawmaker, he could help people get these things. So he ran for the Illinois state legislature. He spoke in public squares and country stores and hayfields. And here's Abraham's words: I am young and unknown to many of you. I was born and have ever remained in the most humble walks of life. I have no wealthy or popular relations to recommend me. So he's saying you might not know who I am, and I might not be a rich guy. I came from a very humble existence, um, and I don't know a lot of rich people. He lost the election, but people liked what he said and how he said it. They liked the way he spoke. I think that kind of answers question number one. The detail from the text that the author thought he was a good speaker. Detail from the text that suggests Lincoln was a good speaker is the author writing that people liked what he said and how he said it. Okay, and then legislature on page 247. I'm going to go back and look. It says here, if he became a lawmaker, he could help get people get things. So he ran for the Illinois state legislature. The beginning of the sentence it said, if he became a lawmaker. So he ran for, so running means he's trying to get people to vote for him to be in the state legislature. So I think the legislature is making laws, right? He wanted to make laws. He wanted to become a lawmaker. The clue on page 247 that help the reader understand the meaning of the word legislature are the words lawmaker and the author saying that to become a lawmaker, Lincoln had to run for the Illinois, oh my gosh, I spelled that right, Illinois state legislature. Okay. What did Lincoln think about slavery? Well, I think we already know that answer, but we're going to use text evidence from these pages to help us answer it thoroughly. He ran again. Oh, so he lost the election. Did you catch that? He ran again. This time he won. So that's perseverance, kids. He ran 3 more times and won. He became a lawyer. His clients praised honest old Abe, the lawyer who was never known to lie. He didn't like the nickname Abe, but it stuck. Abraham's words, resolve to be honest at all events, and if you cannot be an honest lawyer, resolve to be honest without being a lawyer. Choose some other occupation. It's kind of funny because lawyers are kind of have a reputation as being liars, I think. And Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer, but he's saying that you should resolve, which remember means like strive to or make a commitment to being honest. And if you can't be honest in your job, get a new job. Nearly 4 million black men, women, and children were enslaved in southern states. Lincoln thought slavery was a great evil. Oh, what did Lincoln think about slavery? Great evil. I'm going to finish reading this page, though. If he became a United States senator, more people would hear him speak out against it. In speech after speech, he reminded people that slavery did not fit with the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. As a nation, these are Abraham's words, as a nation, we began to declare that all men are created equal. We now practically read it. All men are created equal except Negroes. So he's remembering the Declaration of Independence when we declared independence, America did from Great Britain. He said the words are all men are created equal, but he's saying that's a big fat lie because clearly we're not treating everyone equal, right? So we only have one question for this page. Lincoln thought that slavery was a great evil and said that slavery did not follow the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. You know, I know this is kind of long, but I really do enjoy this story, this book, and learning about him. He's a pretty cool guy. So this time we're going to use details from the text on page 250, and we're going to say, what do you think is happening in the picture on page 251? And why does he look concerned? So we're going to read it. We're going to figure out what's going on in this picture. We're going to figure out why is he so concerned or worried. Make a little inference there. Okay. So he lost the election. So remember, he was talking about running to be a senator. So that's also part of the legislature. But the difference is that he was in the legislature of just the state of Illinois, whereas a senator is in Washington, D.C., where you make laws for the entire country, not just the state. So it's kind of a step up, right? So he ran, but he lost. Even though he lost, just like the first time he lost, his words got attention. People felt he spoke from his heart. His words were powerful and meaningful. In the next 2 years, tension over slavery grew between the South and the North. Lincoln ran for president and spoke out against this evil practice. He won this election. So he didn't get voted to be a senator, but he was like, okay, I'll just run for president then. And he won. That's awesome, right? But a month before he took office, 7 Southern states left the Union. They formed their own government with their own presidents. In his first inaugural address, so remember that's a speech, Lincoln reminded Americans that they were one people. He said, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies." So let's go back to the word. It says inaugural address. Inauguration is when you get sworn in and you officially become the president. So presidents get elected in like November, but they don't actually become the president until like February, and Lincoln did in March. So there was a time span between him being elected and him actually becoming president. There was a few months there, right? So when he was sworn in to become president, he gave a speech. And that's when he said, "We are not enemies, but friends." So what's going on in this picture? Well, I think it's his inauguration. I see the White House in the background, right? A lot of crowds, and he's kind of standing up higher and he's holding some papers. That's probably his speech that he's reading. Why is he concerned? Well, because the southern states, how many? 6 states in the South? Oh, 7, I'm sorry, 7 states in the South, they seceded, which means they left. They didn't want to be a part of the United States anymore. And they said, we're our own country now. That would be concerning, right? Okay. So I think that this picture represents Lincoln's inauguration. How do you spell inauguration? I think it's like that. Is that right? Yay. Inauguration. He is standing in front of the White House and is holding pages in his hand. White House, that's 2 words, Joe. And it should be capitalized because it's like that's kind of its name, right? So he's standing in front of the White House. Let's add the crowd. Surrounded by a crowd. Don't forget, why does he look concerned? I think that he is concerned because 7 southern states had left the Union to become their own country. Okay. Question for this page is biographies often include information about the time period a person lived during. What important event is described on page 253? So biographies are about people, but they're also about history because we need to know like what's going on in the world and why does it matter what they did. Okay, so we're reading the next page 253. On April 12, 1861, Southern troops attacked Fort Sumter, a federal fort in South Carolina. Lincoln knew he had no choice now. The North had to fight the South to bring it back into the Union. These are Lincoln's words. I hold that the union of these states is perpetual. No state can lawfully get out of the Union. Apparently, Abraham Lincoln likes the word perpetual too, because that's the second time he's used it. Families were torn apart as husbands, fathers, and sons went off to war, many never to return. So the event being described on this page is the attack on Fort Sumter. I'm not typing anywhere. This attack is important because it began the Civil War. So he was trying to keep the country together, the Union together, but by attacking this fort, Lincoln had to fight back, right? So on the next page, we're going to look for the answers to these two questions. How does the author show the ways that many Northerners thought about Lincoln? It's kind of a weird question. Why did Lincoln issue the Emancipation Proclamation? I know this, sorry, my question number one is kind of bad, but I'll show you what I mean. Many Northerners worried that Lincoln did not have the skills to lead the nation in this terrible time. He's too backwoods. He's unpresidential. He tells too many silly jokes. He's had too little experience in government. Lincoln's words, if I were to try to read, much less answer, all the attacks made on me, this shop might as well be closed for any other business. I do the very best I know how, the very best I can, and I mean to keep doing so until the end. So that's kind of like a response to his criticisms. He says, if I were to pay attention to it, I would be doing nothing but reading bad things about me. So I'm just going to keep doing what I can and try to get us out of this mess. The question for number one is, so what did the Northerners think of Abraham Lincoln? It said at the beginning of this page, they worried he did not have the skills to lead the nation during this time. So I'm going to start my answer with that. The author says that many Northerners, so these are the people that are on his side, right? Not the Southerners who are fighting against them, but these are the people that were on Lincoln's side. Thought he was not good enough to lead the nation during war. So how does the author show this? Well, the author says this, but then the author has these quotes right here. He's too backwoods. He's too unpresidential. So that's kind of what I was alluding to. Like this is kind of an interesting writing technique that the writer is using that I wanted to call attention to. The author uses quotes from people. So these could be totally like, I don't know if they're real quotes or if they're just made up quotes or whatever, but these are the kind of things they would say. Uses quotes from people to show their criticism of Lincoln. Okay, so I wanted to call attention to this writing because I thought that was pretty a good idea as a writer. So the second one is about the Emancipation Proclamation. So we're going to look for that in the next page. Lincoln believed that true liberty could not permit slavery. He decided to use his wartime powers as commander-in-chief to end slavery. So one thing during a wartime, the president has special powers that he can use that he cannot use unless the country is at war. So he decides, you know what, I have the ability to do something right now because we're at war, so I'm going to do it. In the third year of the war, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It freed over 3 million black men, women, and children and called for black men to join the Union Army. Lincoln's words, "In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free." I love that quote. Like, if we exist in a society that has slavery, then none of us are free. Most white Northerners opposed Lincoln's proclamation, but he stood firm. So the people fighting against the South, the white people, even thought, this is a bad idea, Lincoln. Lincoln's words, "I never in my life felt more certain that I was doing right than I do in signing this paper. My whole soul is in it." Lincoln believed 100% that what he was doing was right. Even if people opposed the idea, he knew it was right, so it was happening. Why did he issue the Emancipation Proclamation? Lincoln issue just means like, why did he make that law? Because he knew he could use his wartime powers to end slavery. Proclamation freed all slaves and allowed black men to join the army. So again, something about government is like the president can't just make laws. However, during wartime, he can issue proclamations such as this. Interesting. I love it. Based on the first sentence on page 256, how was the war going at that time? Well, let's answer this one because the first sentence is right here. The war dragged on. So what does it mean for something to drag on? The first sentence on page 256 says that the war dragged on. This means that the war continued, but when something continues and you use the words dragged on to say that it was still going, it means it sounds like a bad thing, like something that's like, when will this ever end? Like when I am bored, like you might be bored right now, you might be thinking, Miss Hanko, this video is dragging on. When will it end? Yeah. So I'm going to say this means that the war continued and people were eager for its end. Lincoln grew sadder and sadder. Oh, sorry. How does Lincoln feel about ending slavery? Wait, did I say that in the last one? No. Okay. Lincoln grew sadder and sadder as more Americans died. He went to the Gettysburg battlefield and again reminded the nation why these men had sacrificed their lives. So he went to this battlefield where there had been a huge battle, lots of death, and he gave a speech called the Gettysburg Address, which is a very famous speech. He said, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So again, he's referring back to that original founding of our country with ideas like the Declaration of Independence that says all men are equal. But here we are living in a country where all men are not equal, and that is not right. So he's saying that the ideas that we're fighting for and people are dying for are not are important and they're worth it. The Emancipation Proclamation had freed slaves only in the states and territories that were in rebellion. Lincoln wanted slavery ended in the entire nation. Most white lawmakers did not want this. He called them to the White House to convince them of what he knew was right. The moment came when I felt that slavery must die, that the nation might live. That was Lincoln's words. Finally, they agreed. In the fourth year of the war, victory seemed close for the North, but Lincoln felt no joy. Hundreds of thousands of men on both sides had died in battle. The country was deeply divided. Many Northerners wanted to punish the South for starting the war. Southerners were furious that the Union Army had destroyed their cities and homes and crops. Could the nation ever be one people again? So this war is continuing, and people are just like so bitter and angry at each other. The Emancipation Proclamation, he was able to free the states, free slaves in the states that were rebelling, that were trying to leave the country, because that was his power in war. However, there were some states that were kind of like, we're not really going to pick a side, and he wasn't able to free the slaves there. So now he's like, okay, you states, I want you guys to end slavery too. And there was some resistance there. But his words on this page, the moment came when I felt slavery must die, that the nation might live. So he's saying the only way we can end this war and find a good place is for everyone to end slavery. Kind of interesting, right? So how does Lincoln feel about ending slavery? Lincoln thinks ending slavery in all states is an important step in reuniting the country. He said, the moment came when I felt that slavery must die, that the nation might live. Good news, guys. Got some good news. This is the last page. Last question. What did Lincoln mean when he said to bind up the nation's wounds? In his second inaugural address, so that means he gets sworn in to be president for a second term. So people voted for him again. Lincoln shared his vision about how the country could heal itself. With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. So that's the part that we're referring to. The South finally surrendered. The job of healing the nation began, but Lincoln was not there to help. An assassin's bullet ended his life. But his words were there to guide those who chose to remember. It is for us, the living, rather, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So Lincoln is, that's also part of the Gettysburg Address. That's the end of the Gettysburg Address, and super powerful words about how, as this war ends, let us not hold a grudge. Let us come together. Let us understand that we all know that slavery is wrong and we need to do what's right. And this is the only way we're able to heal as a nation, bind up the nation's wounds. So when you get hurt, and you put a band-aid on it, you're binding a wound. Well, this is a metaphorical wound. The nation, there's a lot of pain going on. It's been damaged because we've been fighting with each other. So what kind of band-aid could we use? I mean, we need to unify. We need to work together and we need to do the right thing. That's what Lincoln is saying. He's a great, great man, right? So Lincoln said that everyone needed to work together and bind up the nation's wounds. He was referring to how America could best recover from being at war. with um, changes to Americans. So when Lincoln said that everyone needed to work together and bind up the nation's wound, he was referring to how Americans could best recover from being at war with each other. He suggested that people not hold grudges, which is the malice towards none, kind and generous, and do what is right. Cool. All right. I love this book because I love Abraham Lincoln and I think he's amazing. So hopefully you think he's amazing too after reading that and learned a little bit about U.S. history, which I find fascinating and enjoyed reading along.